three last active mines were this dot, this dot, and this dot. In this illustration, all the dotted area is coal. It's the Suwannee coal seam. It is evident almost anywhere on the mountain. If you dig down 20 feet, you'll end up in what's called the Whitwell Shale. The Whitwell Shale contains shale, Suwannee, more shale, and the Richland coal seam below that. The estimates from 1962 were that we have 28 million tons of coal still underneath the mountain. 28 million tons of coal represents 3 seams and will no longer ever be mined because it's some of the poorest quality coal in the country. It's bituminous coal. It's loaded with pyrites and iron. It also has heavy metals in it. So our effluents that are coming out of the mines contain acid. They also contain cadmium and arsenic. And mine drainage will never end. It's a process where the rainwater comes in from the top, percolates down through the sandstone, gets into the shale. The shale begins to erode because it has limestone in it. And so as the limestone degrades, the shale collapses. The larger spots that this represents here is an actual excavation. That's the size of the mine that was excavated in that specific spot. According to TDAC, we have 100 acres excavated under this site. The star is the corner of Taft Highway and Timesville. So and what's denoted there, the numbers indicate the thickness of the coal. The miners would crawl in on their bellies and scrape out approximately 30 inches of coal. And at that point, I've got a big illustration here that you'll be able to look at later. But that's where they'd stop mining. The coal continues out until it tapers off to nothing. And there's this small line up here that you see there. That's the edge of the coal seam. That's where the coal stops. So there's still coal that's not identified, but that doesn't prevent it from burning. And that was my first concern when the LOP proposal was made. They wanted to put 40,000 gallons of gasoline under the ground at this site. That would have put it about 4 or 5 feet away from the shale layer. Now, I went to TDAC and actually attended their underground storage tank process. And I asked the installers whether they had ever been required to know what was going on beneath. They said once we were hired, we went in, dug the hole, put the tank in. So Tennessee has nothing in its regulations that would prevent them from building over coal. That's still the case. And so I've been up to the legislature and actually presented a bill asking the legislature to make this a requirement. I was told that Tennessee would never, ever set a precedent in environmental, and that this would be a precedent for what they considered the United States was only Louisiana, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. That's the view of the Tennessee legislature. So this very quickly turned into a political problem. And now, after doing more research, I've come to find out that what we're dealing with here is actually a karst environment. And that's a term you're not familiar with, karst is limestone that erodes very quickly. Florida has an immense problem with buildings and homes subsiding. In fact, a man died in his bedroom because a hole formed underneath his bedroom and he fell in and they never got him out. Well, it turns out that this configuration of minerals gives us the same problem because the shale is dissolved by acid, and instead of natural process, the coal mining has created the cavities below. So now we have constant acid, which is created by just the carbon dioxide in the air. And it's even made worse because this area is right next to the highway. And you really can't see it on the projection. I've got it drawn up here. This is Taft Highway. And there's Bachman School. And this is the site that we're looking at. And the reason that those mining areas look so small is that it's a 35-degree climb. So they would go up, dump a bunch of coal, collect it, then crawl back up further, dump a bunch of coal and collect it. On my property, I still have rail from the carts that they would use to bring the coal out. When I bought my property, the federal government came in. I set up the first reclamation program in the state of Tennessee, I believe, and they worked on 6 properties. Mine was the primary property, and they removed approximately 50,000 cubic yards of mine waste, of shale from my creek.
Wow.
And if you add that to the coal that was also taken out, you can see the excavations were tremendous. Now, it started in 1840. We don't know which mine was the first mine created, so we can't predict which is the most vulnerable area. But it's a time-dependent process. And the one statement that sticks in my mind now is that if you have coal and it's been excavated, someday it will collapse.
Sure.
That is the rules that Illinois, that Ohio, Pennsylvania all operate under that premise. Those states will not allow construction over old coal mines, obviously. Tennessee doesn't look that far ahead. And so we're in the process now of still fighting this on the local level, because it turns out that Tennessee's regulations are all now being exerted at the local level. TDAC won't help you in this process. The county has been left responsible for a lot of these issues, and they're not in a position to do the kind of regulation because there's more influence from the home builders and the developers in the county. And that's a reality that we've lived with here for very long. In 2000, I actually participated in an effort to stop the Rains property from being developed because it sits at the very top of the watershed, and everything that was going to occur there was going to come down through Mill Creek. My home is right there. I have 3 mines that are still open on my property. One in my driveway. And every time it rains, coal dumps out over the driveway. So this is not a process that is not self-evident. Anybody who can come up can see what's going on, but we've had people in government come up and ignore the problem. And that's where our major problem lies, is that the people that want to build, and they're not worried about where they're going to put the house. Now, Fox Run is completely over coal. And if you walk up Friedenberg Creek, you can actually see the mine leaps on the hills underneath the homes. In a heavy rain, they'll be pouring water out. Turns out that the rain is a beneficial thing in that it flushes out the coal mines so they're not as acidic, but then that gets dumped into the creek, and that's why we don't have any wildlife in the creek, because the acid is killing everything. The other deposits that are made are the iron, and the iron is broken down by the bacteria that are present, and that's what creates the orange sludge that we see. On Signal Mountain, it also happens to be mixed with sewage, because most of the sewage systems on Signal Mountain are failing. And that's because the soils are poor, there's only a 30-inch clay layer that prevents any drainage from going down much deeper. And so a combination of oil, of acid, and human waste creates some ugly problems. And waterways, the folks that are here, have gone through this area and characterized a lot of these problems. And their statement is, every creek that feeds into Middle Creek is contaminated. And so with E. coli, by the time it reaches the river, which is only 1.8 miles away, we're dumping very contaminated water into the river. Signal Mountain has been sued by the EPA because of their sewage systems, and they're now investing millions of dollars trying to restore that, but nobody's paying any attention to Middle Creek. And Middle Creek will continue to be a problem ad infinitum unless and when we get a horrendously heavy rain. And those events now are obviously becoming more critical because we're seeing these 3- and 4-inch rains in an hour. And that opens up these cavities in a way that nobody's anticipated, and that's the first step in the collapse. Because as you degrade the roof of a mine, which is going on constantly, it works its way up to the surface. And that's why it's not a question of when you see a subsidence from coal mining, it's when, not if. So beyond that, we also have sewage problems. The LOP site wants to put sewage in there, but it's over coal, and if they put in tanks to do the treatment, they're going to be over these cavities, and we can expect to collapse. The same is true if they put in stormwater control. If they put these things over a cavity and they accumulate water, they get heavy and they collapse in. The collapse process creates an unpredictable set of events. Walls can collapse, homes can collapse. In fact, in 1988, when I went to the county and asked them to dynamite some of my openings, they told me they would not dynamite anything on the mountain because they could not predict what other home would collapse. In other words, this is a network of events, and there's no predictability how this process works. The other thing that is impinging on this, obviously, is human activity. When somebody comes in and starts scraping off the soils to put in a building, that exposes that rock to new drainages. And those new drainages can create new problems in that they're going to go in different routes, and the predictability of that is impossible at this stage. One of the things that I've been working on for the last 30 years, really, is asking whoever gets involved in this to do a geotechnical analysis so we can know what's underneath the ground. And there's a number of techniques that can be done on this process, and the oil and gas industry uses this technique, the coal industry uses these techniques to identify deposits. It's important that we keep pressuring the community or the government to use those same methods to protect the lands that are already endangered, because otherwise the developer does his job and leaves, and we're left with the problems. And this is a pattern that's exhibiting all over the state right now. A developer in Nashville just lost a lawsuit because he had damaged a waterway, and they had to go find him to sue him. So these are the problems that development creates, and when you develop over this kind of a hazard, we've got to have some protection. And the only way that occurs is if people show up at public meetings, they show up at zoning board meetings, they show up at town meetings, and say, you got to pay attention to what's going on here, because if something happens in this coal seam, everybody gets affected. And I won't go into the horror stories of what a coal seam fire is, but a coal seam fire would cause the mountain to be vacated, because that starts a process that no one has stopped to this point. There's 135 coal seam fires in the United States right now they can't put out. And most of them are in Colorado and in Wyoming, but one of the most significant ones is in Pennsylvania, in Centralia, Pennsylvania. That fire started in 1962 because the mayor sent the fire department out to burn a trash dump. The trash dump was over the coal seam, started the coal seam on fire, and 10 years later, the government bought everybody out because kids and people kept falling into the fire. Now, 3 more towns further away from Centralia are being evacuated for the same reason. So once the burn starts, there's no stopping it, and people are not paying attention. I reported to the county that Flipper Bend was being built over a coal seam, and they were burning stumps on top of the coal seam. Didn't start up. We got lucky again, but that's the kind of problem that government is not paying attention to. And the reason is, government's now very much in the hands of developers and builders. And they don't want to be nuisanced by this. It affects stormwater, it affects sewage, and all those things are environmental issues that we're dealing with at this moment. So, thank you. I'm more than happy to take this map and show you where things are on. I'll take questions.
Thank you. Is there any more systematic approach that could be taken? Is the EPA not at all interested in this issue? What have the states where they do have control, did you say Illinois? How did that happen? Did that bubble up from the community? Because it seems like, you know, what you're saying, I understand the need for of resistance and change, but for people to pay attention to every proposal by a developer and go out and try to, take care of that seems really challenging. What is the bigger effort to make more top-down approach?
Well, right now, the federal government, until 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, had complete control of all the coal mining in the area. In 1977, SMCRA rule, I use an acronym, which was the Surface Mining Control Act, dealt with surface mines. That's really where all the money's been going, because most of the mining in the last 50 years has been surface mining. They scrape off the top of the mountain, take the coal, and then remediate, quote unquote, the area with plantings. We have a strip mine at the back of this mountain that's never been touched. The four-wheelers go out there and run around like crazy on bare rock because nobody's ever touched it. And it's about 60 acres back there. So that issue is now being complicated by Governor Lee wanting to take over control of coal, because the belief was that bituminous coal was going to become more valuable as time went on. He's given up on that. The state now has relinquished that back to the federal government, but the federal government does not inform people of these kinds of actions. Local governments don't really inform people of these kinds of actions, and it really takes attentiveness, constant attentiveness to this. I get between 20 and 25 emails from TDAC a week on different projects that they're involved in, different sewage systems that they're involved in. And I wish there were some general way to see how that works. And what I did is I got on the mailing list from TDAC. I look at water, I look at oil and gas, I look at toxics. Interesting thing, by the way. The state of Tennessee doesn't consider coal to be dangerous. They will not call it a hazardous waste. They won't exert any control over it. And that's because of the legacy where the old coal companies really had people in place to make sure the government didn't get involved in their business. Now, Tennessee faces, I think, a $7 billion deficit because they're now going to be responsible for cleaning up a lot of these sites because all the coal operations have folded. And the ones that are still around are being sued, and so they're trying to get out by bankruptcy. So in Tennessee, we've got none of those protections. In other states, that's progressed a lot further. In other words, of protection, but EPA, if you've got to go to Washington to argue these things, it's going to take a long time and a much bigger effort than trying to operate locally. Now, locally, I attend planning commission meetings pretty irregularly, but I can do it by my computer and just watch what's going on. If I hear something important is going to occur, then I'll be down there participating. But I can tell you right now, Hamilton County didn't want to listen to me 4 years ago when I jumped up and said, why are you letting this go through? There's coal on this site. And I provided them the TDAC papers that showed that. Nobody got involved, nobody cared. The lawsuit is what stopped the first attempt by OP. And I was part of that lawsuit because I share a property line with that site. So I wish there were other mechanisms. The mechanism is get involved at every stage. And I don't, that's the long and short of it.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Yeah. When you say Fox Run is built over coal, now, what are some of the immediate sort of problems that can develop from, let's say, a big rain, like you were talking about?
Subsidence. A collapse. That would be the immediate effect. And we've had homes on the mountain that have had those issues. Their foundations are suddenly sitting in the air. And we have these issues on Lewis Mine Road. We have those issues on Timesville. At the end of Val's Way, I don't know if you know where that road is. It's a tiny little road that just serves 2 homes. It had a pole developed. It was big enough to catch a car. And TDAC ran out there immediately and got it closed up because people were going into it to adventure. Okay? And, you know, that's just crazy. The mines are probably 5 feet at the tallest. But when 5 feet drops, you can leave a building, a gasoline tank, anything hanging in midair. And they don't recover from that. The 2 homes that they lost at the front of the mountain were because the developer, whoever built those homes, didn't understand the geology that those homes were going on. Those 2 homes have been condemned, and they're going to be torn down. And they were brand new, beautiful, $400,000, $500,000 homes. And they didn't last 2 years. You go out to the front of the mountain and the work they're doing at the Space House. That is because the stormwater coming through that area is moving boulders and damaging people's homes. And the homeowners there are terrified of the next big storm because they could lose pieces of their property. One lady and her mother had to hide in the basement one night because they thought the whole world was coming down, and they went outside, part of their driveway was gone. So stormwater is now just as strong an issue as coal is, and you combine the two, and you're asking for trouble.
I just wondered if there'd be a Chattanooga Times Free Press investigative reporter or a local news investigative reporter who'd be interested in this story. Because if potential buyers and homeowners knew about this, then they could put pressure on the
That's exactly why it's not in the paper.
Right.
Okay? That's exactly why it's not. I call this the black elephant of Single Mountain. Nobody in the county wants to talk about it. They heard me speak at the planning commission. Nobody said a word. Nobody asked any questions.
Press.
And Dave Flester and I know each other. He's been to a number of my presentations. It won't be in the paper. It's just, it causes so much turmoil and concern that they don't want to deal with it. And so again, you're out here trying to educate people to be present when that's going on.
One of the things too, with the houses that you were talking about that are, unlivable now, is the developer is usually not the person who gets the responsibility for that home. It's the person who bought it, because there's no responsibility going back to that developer doing a bad thing and putting that place in the wrong place.
Yeah.
I kind of laughed when she talked about the paper, because within this year, there are still some people at the paper who will do some of this stuff, but most of the people who are now doing articles for the paper have been there like 2 weeks, and they're just out of school, and that is a rotating I've met 4 brand new within 2 weeks for 4 different events, and so they have no knowledge of the area, no understanding of the history, and they write what they're told, and they write the parts that they're told.
One of the editors on the Times Free Press owns a home down below me.
Yeah,
That home has been in 3 feet of water on 2 different occasions in the last 3 years.
yeah.
They will not even talk to me about it. Okay? And that's the other thing that people don't understand is we can have flooding up here very easily. The Mill Creek watershed, when it crosses Timesville, flattens out into a big plain. There's a little Baptist church back there that has a driveway that goes down about 15 feet. In one of those rains, the water got to their front door. That's how deep it can get. Anybody living along Middle Creek, Creekshire, Burnham Woods, all of these places are vulnerable to these events because once the erosion starts with these streams, the water's strong enough to move boulders the size of a small car. And so, and that's something we can't control. I mean, those events are happening, and they're going to continue to happen. They're going to get worse, as a matter of fact. And all you can do is be vigilant and make sure that the community understands that you're taking a risk every time you disturb nature. And our nature is very fragile. There's nowhere else in Tennessee, from my investigation, that has this much community built over coal. Most of the coal mines were strip mined at the top, and people lived down in the valley.
What about the Durham mines up on Lookout Mountain and over in Dunlop, where a lot of mining was good? Now Dunlop's not, I don't know, that's not really high potential for development. But those Durham mines, they've turned it into a lot of trails and everything. I hike frequently, but there's a lot of development on Lookout Mountain too.
Yeah,
That's in Georgia.
and Georgia is not any more attentive to this process than others. As a sidelight, one of the other things I work on is sewage. Right now, Chattanooga is drying out human sewage and shipping it to other states to put on farms.
Yep.
And that represents a real problem because Copper Hill is getting sewage from Atlanta. And so this process is just getting way out of hand because there isn't enough money for infrastructure. That's what it comes down to. They don't want to build new sewage systems. They don't want to invest more in stormwater control, and yet they want to build everywhere.
Part of that goes up to the state of Tennessee legislature, because there is money for that infrastructure now. Tennessee is being uncooperative, and so that means it doesn't get to us in
No.
any way.
The coal-
Unless there are routes that they find, that they can go around, like what the state chooses.
The coal mining reclamation,
Yeah.
by the way, when they say reclamation on underground mines, all it does is treat the outside of the mine. They scrape out the front of the mine, they pack it in with limestone, cover it with dirt and plant it, and that's reclamation. The cavity underneath never gets touched. So the problem is only cosmetic addressed. It's not structurally ever going to be addressed. Now, there are people claiming that you can pump caulk and soils into those holes, but I've not heard of any one project that succeeded with that. So that's just the reality of it. Caution is the word. I don't think we can stop development up here on that basis, but when you stop and think about the traffic problem, it all relates. It's all environment, and we can't get away from that. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And let me show you what other. This is Taft Highway. This is Bachman over here, and these are all the coal mines that the U.S. Geological Survey describes.
What about had any seismic activity to be concerned about?
Well, the New Madrid Fault